Welcome back. It is the next day, Tuesday. That would be the day. Going to get ourselves prepped. First thing we're going to do is peel the tapes on this epoxy. Our epoxy's all set, so we'll have a closer look at that later. We've got our other epoxy here that we've peeled the tape off. This one had the foam pour, which has all gone well. So that's ready for a sand and a skim. This is the one that came in yesterday with the busted fin box, so that is still quite wet. We won't be doing anything to that today. I suspect that there's quite a bit of water in that board. And we've got the Ian burn, which is also all filled. Our foam is poured, so that's ready to be sanded and skimmed as well. And shaped. We're gonna have to shape that tail up on both points again. So what that means is that every board we started on yesterday that started on this rack is now back on this rack this morning. So now we just work our way through our list again the exact same way that we did it yesterday. We also just had this yellow mowel brought in. It's got a hole in the nose, it's poly, so we're probably gonna try and work it into the rotation with the rest of these boards. And as usual, the epoxies will be left to the end of the day, just before we go home. So now we're gonna sort of separate our polyboard batch into two different batches. So we're going to start working on the boards that still require a sanding resin pour, at least one, and then the second part of our poly batch are boards that have all of the sanding resin required and are now waiting for laminating and laminating resin. So we're going to add this bad boy to the rotation now. That is the only ding on the board. So we're going to prep that and then fill it like we did to the others yesterday. So we have sanded down and shaped both of our foam inserts, so the nose on this one and the tail on the burn. So these are all rough shaped how we want them, but now of course they've got pinholes and things in them, so we need to skim them and fill those pinholes with some micro balloons. Then we've prepped the nose of this big yellow boy here. So the plan is we're going to mix some poly resin with wax additive to make a sanding resin. We're going to fill the nose of the yellow one because that's going to be a clear repair job. And then once that's filled, then we're going to add some micro balloons to that resin, and then we're going to skim that foam. So we're going to do all three of those boards with the same 30 mils of poly resin. Then while those three resin pours are kicking off, then we're going to continue on prepping the rest of the boards. By the time those boards are prepped, this resin we're about to pour should be ready to sand, so we'll take them out, sand them, and then the whole batch will be at the same stage, all caught up together. I've been asked before, if you're pouring poly resin with micro balloons, do you need to add a wax additive to make it sandable? And that kind of depends how thick you're making your paste. A really thick paste won't require a wax additive. I personally prefer to use sanding resin with Q-Cell as opposed to laminating resin with Q-Cell. When making sanding resin, we're mixing in 2% wax styrene or wax additive, and that's pretty easy to do using large quantities of resin. So if we were mixing up to resin coat an entire board, maybe we're going to mix 400 mils of resin, well that means we require 8 mils, 2% of our wax styrene. That's all good if you're mixing large quantities like that, but in this case we're only working with 30 mils of resin, so 2% of 30 mils is 0.6 mils, and I don't know how to measure accurately 0.6 mils. So when working with small amounts of resin like this, the rule that I use is for every 10 mils of resin, that's going to use 6 drops of wax additive, and that will give you your 2%. Now that all three of those boards are poured, we can continue on prepping for lamination what's left on the racks. So just while we're sanding these boards, catching them up, getting them ready to be glassed, I just want to give a shout out to Kelly. Kelly signed up as a member of the channel, so thank you, Kelly. Really appreciate it. Look forward to getting to know you a bit better, and we'll see you in either a members video or on the members Facebook page. Choo! So we've got all those boards prepped now, and looking at the resin that we just poured before, it's kicked, it's hard, but it's probably still a little ways off of sandable. So we're going to get these off these racks, put the rest of the ones we just sanded on these racks and start glassing, and we can catch these ones up later. Now I say that, but while I was moving these boards into the sanding shed, I kind of had another look at the nose of that yellow board, and the resin was hard enough to sand. I don't know the science behind it because I'm not a scientist, but I'm pretty convinced that mixing micro balloons with resin slows the curing time of the resin. So while the pure sanding resin on the nose of this yellow board was ready to sand, the micro balloon mixes, which keep in mind were made from the same resin, they were still too gummy to sand, and they'd take another hour or so to be ready. So because we've been able to sand the yellow one, we now have 4 boards waiting for glass, so that's our next stage, but one of those boards requires paint. So the fish needs paint on the nose, it's a dark blue, almost a black, and on the tail, which is obviously going to be an orange. So we're going to cut the cloth for the fish first, so we're not faffing around trying to cut cloth over wet paint. And then once we've got that cloth cut, we're going to apply our paint to the tail and the nose. And then after we've painted them, then we'll prep the cloth for the 1, 2, 3 remaining boards. And by the time we've cut all the cloth for those boards, the paint on the fish should be tacked off enough that it'll be ready to laminate. So then we'll be able to laminate all of the boards together with the same batch of resin. So just while we're cutting this cloth and getting ready to paint this fish, I also want to give a big shout out and a massive thanks to Yarn. Now I'm pretty sure the name is Yarn, but my mum's name is actually Jan.
Are you my mummy?
So if it's Yarn, thank you, and if it's Jan, thank you. They have become the newest member of Small Kind Ding Repair's YouTube channel. So again, see you in either the Facebook group or in the members only videos, and let me know, is it Yarn or Jan? I get asked a lot how long to let the paint dry before you laminate over it. Is it going to affect adhesion, having paint beneath the surface that you're glassing and your fresh fiberglass, which are all good questions. So basically we want the paint to be dry enough to touch and move the cloth around on and laminate with a squeegee without smearing or damaging the paint job. But we don't want it cured. We want it still only touch dry, so it's still gonna have a little bit of tackiness to it, which is gonna give it a little bit of adhesive quality. That said, we're putting as little paint on as possible while still getting the coverage that we want, because certainly if you load the paint on super thick, you are going to potentially have adhesion problems with your lamination. So as is standard, we're going to be using Molotov paints, and we have a Mad Sea Cherry Red, which is number 32, and a Mad Sea Dare Orange, which is the number 14. So we're going to use the red just to get a little bit of coverage, and then we're going to use the orange to sort of make it look the part. But you can see this isn't just one color of orange because it was a resin tint, so the red is just going to make it a little more motley, so it looks more random as opposed to just one solid color. And before I start, I am just going to mask off this cut lap line. It doesn't have to be an amazing paint job, just better than what it is currently. Remember that we want all of the paint underneath fiberglass. So the bigger area you end up painting, the bigger your fiberglass patch is going to need to be. We've only sanded to here, so our fiberglass cloth is going to come to here, our resin coat will come to here. So we don't want to spread this paint too far and not give ourselves enough room for lamination and hot coats. Anything that's not underneath fiberglass cloth will be sanded away in the final sand, and it'll create a weird paint edge that'll stand out like dog's bollocks. Same deal, we've only sanded to here, so we don't want to paint much further than that because we need our cloth resin coat. So unfortunately we have the smallest amount of number 97 tulip blue, which is probably not going to be dark enough to match, but it's also the darkest blue I have, and there is a tiny amount in there. So we're going to use a black, this is number 214, the same way we use the red on the tail end, and then we'll go over with a little bit of blue, and hopefully that's going to darken our blue up a little and give us good coverage. So now that all that paint is on and it's drying but not curing, we can cut our cloth for the other 3 boards, and then by the time we've prepped all that cloth, this paint should be dry enough that we can laminate it and all the others at the same time. In the last video we spoke a little bit about the Soviet era gas mask that I've been trialing when laminating and resin coating boards, and I said that I liked it, and I do like it. It's actually really comfortable. It seems to filter really well. I can't smell any type of resin or thinners or any chemicals I'm working with. The filter on the chin is a little bit annoying because you can kind of accidentally knock a board when you're sort of looking at something closely, but other than that, I rate it quite highly. About halfway through making this series though, it came to my attention that there was a big recall on both masks and in particular filters of this kind. And the reason for that is because back in that kind of Soviet era, a lot of these masks in not only Russia, but in England and Germany and all over the world, the actual filter itself inside the casing was made up of asbestos. And so if that asbestos fractures, then you're literally breathing in asbestos dust. This is obviously quite counterproductive. So with those 4 boards laminated, we are free to prep our epoxy boards. So we've got our 2 from yesterday, this one, and then this one actually came in today. And then once we have those epoxy boards prepped, we will revisit these 2 remaining poly boards, and I think, yeah, this will be all good to sand by the time we've sanded these epoxies. So you can imagine I wasn't overly stoked to know that potentially I had been working in a mask which more than likely had a fractured filter, because that mask has travelled all over the world with me and I've worn it on multiple occasions over the last decade or so. I actually originally bought it to wear at a downhill skateboarding race that I used to organise and run in Finland, of all places, and so I skated a lot of hills wearing this mask. I crashed a lot of skateboards wearing this mask. So I was a little bit disturbed to think that that entire time while I was heavily breathing, I was potentially breathing in asbestos. And even during the week making this series, was I breathing in asbestos dust? So while trying to figure out the best way to sue the antique store that originally sold me this mask that 10 or 15 years ago, I also did some digging
and I contacted a few army surplus stores that deal in masks specifically like this. Thankfully, they let me know that my mask filter is a model 79, and after model 74, they stopped using asbestos as the filter material in the mask.
All of our cloth is cut for the poly boards. We've got the bottom side of the fish, the first and the bottom side of the burn. The nose on the fish is going to be fine. It's wrapped with 6-ounce double wrap, so that should be sweet. Top side for the chili, bottom side for this big X. Got the rail ding over here, but that didn't require filling, so we're just laminating straight over that. The nose, which we filled with foam and screeted, and then our tail end for the JS, and I just found another little ding here, so I've given that a sand. Doesn't require filling, so we're going to laminate straight over that. Our yellow mal doesn't need any more cloth, so that's waiting for the hot coat stage. Once all of these are ready for resin pours, then it will rejoin the group. And then we have our epoxies sanded and ready to go, waiting on the horizontal racks, except for that one there, which is just bleeding water. So it's, and this isn't even where the fin box was, it's coming from a crack just here. And there's a lot of water coming out of it, so we're gonna have to deal with that. So let's mix some resin and get all this cloth laid down.
All that said though, it is probably not a good idea for me to be wearing this mask with this filter, but luckily they do actually make modern filters for this type of mask. To filter out really harsh chemicals like the resins that I work with, I probably need an adapter that would go on the mask, and then the new filter would go into that adapter, and it's just going to make a perfect seal. So that's something I might look at in the future when I'm a bit more well off with money, but right now I think I'm going to retire this mask until that day comes. Hopefully though that day won't be too far away, because there are some genuine plus sides to a mask like this. So one of my biggest pet peeves with my 3M full face is the straps. The straps are made out of rubber, and so they snap. Over time they just get stretched out and they get worn thinner, and eventually they give away. And to replace the straps on that mask cost me about $96, and I pay that once or twice a year, which I believe is an outrageous price for a rubber strap. Whereas a mask like this Soviet one, that's obviously not an issue because there are no straps. So if I can fork out $100, $200 to get the adapter and a new filter for this mask, then it may be worth it in the long run, because I might end up saving quite a bit of money just maintaining my 3M mask. So I would continue to use the 3M mask for laminating full boards. Like I said, that filter hanging off the chin, there is a little bit of risk there of knocking the board, but that seems to be more apparent with bigger lamination jobs. Small jobs like these ones, it doesn't seem to be so much of an issue. And even if you do hit the board with the filter in a situation like we're watching now, the chances are you're not going to hit wet fiberglass or wet resin, so it doesn't really matter. So yeah, that's basically the story of the mask up until this point. So after this series, you might not see the mask as much anymore. I know that's disappointing for you guys, but it'll be back one day, I promise.
That is it for day 2. So all of our poly boards have at least one side of cloth on them. All of our epoxy boards have at least one side of cloth on them, aside from the one that just arrived today, which is filled. So tomorrow we're going to take all the cured epoxies back over to the sanding shed, and we're going to move all of our polys back onto these racks, and we will start pouring resin on the laminations that need them. And there's still a couple of boards like this one which needs to be flipped over and laminate that side. So then between poly coats tomorrow, we'll be prepping those epoxies, and we should get all of our poly resin poured tomorrow, which means they'll all be ready for sand and polish the following day. All going well, we might even get some finished tomorrow. So until tomorrow, have a good evening yourselves, and we will see you Wednesday.
But wait, just before you go, guys, I want to give a really quick shout out to all of the members of the channel: Jan, Kelly, Third Earth Surf, Sam, Empurada, Rick, Pedro, Gareth, South County, MJ, and Suzuki Ton. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks for being members. Thanks for being there. And I am working with YouTube. We're gonna have this bit changed, probably to above average member. I think I'm talking to YouTube as we speak, so we'll try and adjust that. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Appreciate your time. We'll see you in the next one.